America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Jordan Bruno, Vice President of the Job Creators Network. Today we're joined by Brian Reardon. Brian is the President of the S Corporation Association and the Principal at Reardon Consulting LLC. He has over 25 years of experience working at the highest levels of public policy within Congress, the executive branch, and the private sector. Prior to his current roles, Brian worked at the White House as a special assistant to President George W. Bush at the National Economic Council. Brian joins us today to talk about the legal battle surrounding the Corporate Transparency Act and the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Brian, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Thank you for having me.
So, Brian, maybe you could just give our listeners an overview of what is the Corporate Transparency Act and what is the battle surrounding it?
Yeah, sure. So, if you're a small business owner, you need to pay attention because this is something that will affect you. You need to understand the rules, and you may be required to file. Fortunately, right now there's a pause, but you may be required to file. So, the Corporate Transparency Act is a long-time effort to crack down on money laundering, terrorism finance. And the concern was, well, we have these shell corporations, like, for instance, I created Reardon Consulting LLC, right? So that could be used to fund illicit activities, right? I might use that as a shell company by, getting Reardon Consulting LLC, creating a bank account, and then taking my illegal money, whether it's terrorism or drug related or whatever, and run the money through that bank account, and therefore hiding the illicit source of the money, right? That's what they're going after.
Got it. So essentially, they're worried that somebody's going to make that look like, try to hide it as legitimate business income.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or just, somehow hide the source, right? If you've watched crime shows on TV, you see them do these sorts of things. Somewhere along the line, though, they lost the beat because when they tried to define what a shell company is, instead of defining it based on activity and sort of risk factors like, lots of money coming and going all of a sudden, they instead defined it as every small business in the United States of America. Literally 33 million different entities are required to report under the Corporate Transparency Act. So that's the first problem is if you have an LLC or a C Corp or an S Corp and you have both fewer than 20 employees, and it has to be 5 million or less in revenues, then you have to file your beneficial ownership information under the CTA. And that's where we get to the second problem, which is, okay, now that they define this huge swath of entities, legal entities, as the targets, as quote unquote shell corporations, they then shifted and said, okay, we want to know kind of the man behind the man behind the man, right? We want to know who the guy is who's masterminding the whole thing. That would be the beneficial owner is the term of art that they use. Except once again, they lost the beat because instead of going after and figuring out a way to identify Tony Soprano in the mafia operation, they went and defined everybody who makes any decisions whatsoever of any import for the organization. So if I'm running McDonald's franchises, I have to report because I own the franchises. But what about my manager? The guy I just, promoted from Fry Cook. He's now a beneficial owner. I have to report his information. What about the assistant manager? Well, I think I got to report his information too, the way they wrote the rules up. So you're literally talking about a very broad group of people within each organization where as the person in charge, I need to collect their personal information and then report it to FinCEN. You got to report their date of birth, their residence. You have to have some sort of a photo ID like a driver's license or a passport. You need to submit all that by the deadline. And then here's the real problem because, for people like me, we're in consulting, easy peasy, right? I filed in 5 minutes. It wasn't a problem. but you have to remember to update everything. Anytime any information changes, you have to update it. And that means within 30 days of, say, I move, or say I close our Reardon Consulting and do something else, I'm going to have to go in to the website and remember to update that. And again, for a single member LLC, not a problem. But what happens if, like the McDonald's franchise, what happens if I have 10 franchises, right? So I've got 10 of those. Each one is a different legal entity. So I have to file for each one. And I have to remember to update the personal information of all the beneficial owners of each one of those. So every time somebody leaves as the manager and I replace them, I got to go in there and update that information. And so it's just this constant monitoring thing where it's not just a one-time and you're done thing. It's you need to remember to put on your calendar once a month to review all your beneficial ownership requirements and make sure that they're updated. And if you don't, it's a felony.
Wow.
It's 2 years in jail. It's multiple thousands of dollars of fines. It's not a small thing. And so I don't think the people who wrote the law, I know most of them are really just want to go after terrorism financing. They want to get these Russian oligarchs, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think they understood how small businesses are organized, how legal entities kind of play a role, because, they went after smaller enterprises by definition, except the way they drafted it up by looking at legal entities as opposed to business organizations. You actually have a lot of large companies that are going to have to file as well. I have some of my members are going to have to make 400 or 500 filings, separate filings under this thing. They're literally going to have to hire somebody specifically to stay on top of the beneficial ownership reporting. So that's the law, and that's why we're opposed to it. It's not that we support terrorism financing. This isn't going to work. I mean, the criminals aren't going to self-report. Tony Soprano is not going to go in and, do a good faith effort in telling people who runs the Bada Bing Club, right? That's just not going to happen. You're already breaking the law. What do they care about a paperwork violation? The people who are at risk are the law-abiding, small businessmen and women who are just trying to make ends meet. And now they got this new obligation and this new thing they got to remember, right? Every month they got to go back and make sure that they're not in violation of the CTA. It's really a poorly designed law. It does nothing to help law enforcement. Think about the database that they're going to have under this thing. 32 million entities. Each one has one or more beneficial owners being reported. So maybe 50, 100, 120 million different individuals reported in this database, with no flags whatsoever. There's nothing in that information that signals, oh, these guys are legitimate and these guys are engaged in criminal activity. It really is a remarkable overreach. Fortunately, we've fought it when it was before Congress. Unfortunately, we failed there. But since then, since the small business community has kind of gotten aware of it, two things have happened. One, members of Congress have gotten religion and they now understand this is not a good law. And there's lots of efforts on the Hill, both in the House and the Senate, to repeal it, to delay it, et cetera. The second thing is that we're in the courts. We're in 11 different district courts around the country. We've won at 3 of them at certain, in Alabama, we won on the merits. In Texas, there's 2 different decisions that were summary judgments, but they effectively delayed the filing. So the filing was supposed to be January 1. Because of sort of the roller coaster of decisions we've had, we're now in a moment where filing is paused, and FinCEN has said they're going to wait until the courts kind of resolve this whole issue before they re-engage and require businesses to file again. So that all happened over the holidays. It was kind of a bit of a circus. But then the bottom line is that, if you're required to file and you haven't filed yet, you're okay. You don't have to file until we get some resolution out of the courts, whether this thing's constitutional or not.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that rundown. That's definitely the most comprehensive detailing I've heard of it, and really helpful for our Main Street members who are, struggling to keep up with that flurry of back and forth, like you said, over the holidays. Do you think that Congress and the Trump administration then are waiting for the final ruling from the courts before they decide what they're going to do, or is it everything happening in tandem?
Things are happening in tandem. We have gotten signals that, certainly the Trump administration takes a completely different view of the CTA than the Biden administration did. So the Biden administration, despite the fact that they had lost at several district courts, they continued to say, we are going to enforce this CTA. You are going to have to file. So, for instance, in the Alabama case, The decision was for the plaintiffs, but the judge did not do one of those nationwide injunctions. He simply said the plaintiffs in this case, the National Small Business Association and the actual small businesses in the case, they don't have to file, but everybody else does. Which, I'm not a lawyer, and that just strikes me as odd. Is you come in and you say, okay, this law is unconstitutional for a variety of reasons, but we're only going to make it unconstitutional for the plaintiffs. We're not going to make it unconstitutional for, the 32 million other businesses out there. Despite that sort of activity, FinCEN continued to say, well, we're not going to require the NSBA guys to file, but everybody else does. So they were determined to create this database and to get the filing going. The Trump folks have a different approach, and that's why the current stay is in place. We think it's going to remain in place because we don't think the Trump folks are going to challenge the court decision that created this stay. So we have this opportunity here, or a pause, to do two things. One, hopefully to win at the court level. And this thing's going to the Supreme Court one way or the other. It'll probably be the Alabama case. But we're expecting that we'll win it. Hopefully we win at the court level. We expect the Supreme Court to have a decision on this, a final decision by the end of the year. So that'll be helpful. In the case that we don't win, that the CTA remains in place, we're going to need to figure out Plan B, and that's obviously a legislative plan. Challenge there is to get it done, you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, right, to do a repeal or some sort of dramatic rewrite of the CTA. Right now, I'm not sure we have 60 votes, and that's where our advocacy and the work that you guys do, the important work you guys do, can be really helpful, because we need to dial up the messaging to Congress that this is a bad law. It's not going to crack down on criminal activity. It's just going to create a lot of criminals because very few businesses know it exists, right? They don't know of these obligations, and we really need to get rid of it. And unless we can dial up the political pressure, we're not going to be able to get very far in Congress.
Is there a compromise solution that you are advocating for, or anyone on our side that could maybe accomplish some of the anti-terrorism aspects, but still protect business owners?
Sure. There's something called the customer due diligence rules that were part of Dodd-Frank. They implemented them around 2017, 2018. And these are obligations on the banks that when somebody like me goes in with a business, with a legal entity, and opens up a bank account, the bank, has to collect this beneficial ownership information. Not only that, but they also have to monitor the account. So if they see suspicious activities, they need to file what they call a suspicious activity report with Treasury, right? So they have in place rules designed to collect the same information and make sure that somebody, a third party, is actually, ensuring the information's accurate, which the CTA doesn't have, and following the money, monitoring actual financial transactions going through the bank accounts. That's already in place. And I think they should build on those, because unless you're following the money, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One of the other frustrations with the CTA is, they target smaller entities, right, with the parameters that I discussed. They also exempted a bunch of folks. So they exempted accountants, they exempted banks, they exempted financial advisors, anybody who's regulated or reports to the SEC. So effectively, they exempted all the people and entities that you would expect to be at the center of some sort of a money laundering operation, right? I mean, how do you launder money without a bank account?
Right.
Most money launderers have accountants, right? Mm-hmm. Those guys are not part of the CTA. It literally is the most misdirected law I've ever seen.
Wow. Well, we'll keep fighting on all these fronts, and hopefully we can get a resolution, because our polling suggests that less than a third of small business owners even know about the law. So, I mean, yeah. It's certainly opening them up, like so many regulations out there, to be unwitting, and in this case, felony, and open up to jail time. So, I mean, that is definitely a pretty scary proposition. I'm switching gears for a minute. One of the biggest priorities of our members, and I'm sure yours is S Corp, is the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If Congress doesn't act, small businesses that aren't structured as C corporations lose a lot of benefits, including a 20% tax deduction, accelerated expensing, and lower rates. Can you tell our listeners what you're hearing from your S corporations on the importance of extending the TCJA?
Sure. Yeah. So I think we're in good shape there. We've been very busy, as you can imagine, for the last 8 years, ever since 2017 when the thing was enacted. Getting 199 made permanent, extending the rate reductions that were part of the TCJA. Those are our two priorities. We've been working to build up support in Congress since 2017. The bills to extend and make permanent the 199 deduction, this is that 20% small business deduction, were introduced last week. We had over 150 co-sponsors in the House. I think we're up to 40 co-sponsors in the Senate, so we're getting close to half of the Senate is supporting the permanence. The Main Street Certainty Act is what it's called. So in the House, Lloyd Smucker, Republican Ways and Means member from Pennsylvania, is the lead sponsor. In the Senate, it's Senator Steve Daines from Montana. They've been working this issue very, very hard and making sure that their colleagues are well aware of the challenge that we face. As you guys know, if we don't succeed at extending these provisions and the other parts of the TCJA, it's a $4 trillion tax hike on families, on businesses. It's the largest tax hike in American history. So I know the Republicans running the Congress, particularly Jason Smith, is a big champion. The Speaker was a co-sponsor of the bill. Over on the Senate side, John Thune, the new majority leader, is a co-sponsor. So we've got strong support from both the House and the Senate, the tax writing committees, and the leadership. The challenge we face is they've got such a thin majority in the House. It's going to be really, really difficult. They've got a very difficult path to get a bill done this year. And that's what we're trying to focus on right now, is just building up this imperative that it has to happen, particularly with, the down the aisle members, the more junior members who weren't here in 2017. This is the first time they had to deal with this issue. So we need to do a lot of education and help with those guys.
Absolutely. In addition to the provisions you mentioned there, one of the provisions that we hear that is so important to average small businesses is that accelerated expensing. Originally, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, small businesses got 100% bonus depreciation. That's slowly phased out, and now this year, to the degree they can only immediately expense 20% of their capital expenditures. Do you know if that provision, boosting that back up, is in the Main Street Certainty Act, or what are you hearing on that particular?
So the Main Street Certainty Act is specific to 199A, the 20% small business deduction. Okay. Right? There are other bills out there, other champions for the depreciation provisions. There's the cap on interest deductibility. There's in the TCJA, they required the amortization of R&E expenses, which, doesn't just affect guys in lab coats, right? It's remarkable how many businesses, including small businesses, have R&E expenses, right? And right now they're not allowed to write those off.
Right.
So all of those are very, very important provisions. And I know Jason Smith well. He tried to get many of them enacted last year when we had a divided government. Now that Republicans are all in charge, he's going to make another run at it. I know those will all be part of this package. They want to get it all done. The challenge is, do they have the votes to do it? And that's where we come in with our advocacy, trying to make sure that we provide them with the support they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's we're seeing from the same book. We've been pushing the idea that the taxes don't need to be exactly offset, showing, for instance, the Congressional Budget Office's projections before the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and how off they were with how much it was going to cost. So we're hoping that members don't take that at face value and let that scare them. Last question for me then is, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extension, is there anything that you would like to see in a blue sky scenario be added than just a pure extension?
Well, one of the things we've been doing at S Corp is, when they enacted the SALT cap, this is the cap on your ability to deduct your state and local taxes, SALT. One of the challenges was for pass-throughs, we're kind of stuck in the middle, right? So with individuals, you're subject to the cap as an individual taxpayer. C corporations, companies that pay the taxes at the entity level, they can continue to deduct their SALT. For pass-throughs, we're stuck where if the taxes and income flow through to the shareholder, then it was subject to the cap. If it's like property taxes or something paid by the entity, that's deductible, right? Well, so what we did was we went around to all the states where they tax pass-throughs and had them give our members an election so they can elect to pay their taxes at the entity level. And when you do that, when you make that election, you restore your SALT deduction. So one of our challenges now is there's some folks that say, oh, well, that's a pass-through loophole. Oh, no, it's not a pass-through loophole. Business taxes have always been deductible since we had an income tax, right? So all we're doing is making sure that they remain deductible. And so part of our challenge is making sure that whatever they do on SALT, they treat the pass-through community, they treat small businesses fairly. So they're not taking away our SALT while allowing, Apple and some of these larger companies to continue to deduct it. That would be a bad outcome from us. And we're spending a lot of time educating folks on that.
Got it. Brian, where can our listeners go to find out more about your organization and the work you guys are doing?
We got two websites. So there's scorp.org, which is our main website. We just posted the most recent Talking Taxes in the Truck podcast there. So go there and you can listen to me drive around in a truck and talk taxes. The second website is the Main Street Employers Coalition. And this is kind of our army apparatus where we work with the trade associations like yours, NFIB, the Farm Bureau, and try to coordinate so that everybody is moving in the same direction and we're as effective as possible. That website focuses exclusively on 199A, the SALT deduction that I just discussed, and the Corporate Transparency Act. That's what that coalition's focused on.
Well, Brian, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. And thank you to all for taking the time to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back soon with another episode.